of the universe, calming the storm and helping you rebirth. We are the tribes, the native of this moment. We're giving back to you what they have stolen. We will rise and climb the wall. We can see beyond the visible. It will reflect us the way we.
Yeah, sure, why not? Whenever you want. Okay, so first of all, I'll just introduce myself and Danielle. My name is Thomas Sakowitz, and this workshop is called Aligning with the Cosmic Womb. And the basis of this workshop is basically going to be about archetypes and archetypal languages and how they have played a part in human history in transforming the worldview throughout the ages, and how that they've basically always been a foundational aspect of the world and the worldview.
Hey, excuse me. Hey, excuse me. You guys are screwed. We're presenting now. That's okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
But yeah, basically how they've always been a major part of the worldview. Even up to this point, science still uses a lot of archetypes, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, even though they're not generally so much deemed as archetypes as they have been in the past. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Danielle, and like he was saying, the talk, what we're doing is about archetypes, and we're going to cover different systems and models, and well, it's kind of interesting how we came about this, because we didn't know that archetypal language was like this specific thing. We just started calling it that. So we started studying like I Ching and astrology and human design and doing like shamanic medicine, and we started like making these correlations and intuitions, and we were like, oh, how do we like translate this to people? You know, because it's like really profound, and it gives a lot of deeper meaning to many things. So it's funny when we started to like map this out to do this talk, we actually found that there are people that, like scientists and scholars and professors that are actually like, this is a thing, you know, and it's interesting. It really shows like how it works, because it's tapping into like the collective. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, originally this was just going to be an introduction to human design, but what we wanted to do for starters is just give a foundation on archetypal languages in general, because a lot of people may not necessarily be familiar with how archetypes work, and sometimes it can be hard to really sink into something like human design or astrology or something like that if you don't have a good firm grasp of what archetypes are and how they work. So I'm going to start out with an excerpt from Cosmos and Psyche by Richard Tarnas. Richard Tarnas is one of the scholars that we were talking about. He's a PhD who heads up a university in California called the California Institute for Integrated Studies. It says, imagine for a moment that you are the universe, but for the purpose of this thought experiment, let us imagine that you are not the disenchanted, mechanistic universe of conventional modern cosmology, but rather a deep-souled, subtly mysterious cosmos of great spiritual beauty and creative intelligence. And imagine that you are being approached by two different epistemologies, two suitors, as it were, who seek to know you. To whom would you open your deepest secrets? To which approach would you be most likely to reveal your authentic nature? Would you open most deeply to the suitor, the epistemology, the way of knowing, who approached you as though you were essentially lacking in intelligence or purpose, as though you had no interior dimension to speak of, no spiritual capacity or value, who thus saw you as fundamentally inferior to himself? Let us give the two suitors, not entirely arbitrarily, the traditional masculine gender, who related to you as though your existence were valuable primarily to the extent that he could develop and exploit your resources to satisfy his various needs, and whose motivation for knowing you was ultimately driven by a desire for increased intellectual mastery predictive certainty, and efficient control over you for his own self-enhancement? Or would you, the cosmos, open yourself most deeply to the suitor who viewed you as being at least as intelligent and noble, as worthy of being, as permeated with mind and soul, as imbued with moral aspiration and purpose, as endowed with spiritual depths and mystery as he? The suitor seeks to know you, not that he might better exploit you, but rather unite with you and thereby bring forth something new, a creative synthesis emerging from both of your depths. He desires to liberate that which has been hidden by the separation between knower and known. His ultimate goal of knowledge is not increased mastery, prediction, and control, but rather a more richly responsive and empowered participation in a co-creative unfolding of new realities. He seeks an intellectual fulfillment that is intimately linked with imaginative vision, moral transformation, empathic understanding, and aesthetic delight. His act of knowledge is essentially an act of love and intelligence combined, of wonder as well as discernment, of opening to a process of mutual discovery. To whom would you be more likely to reveal your deepest truths? This is not to say that you, the universe, would reveal nothing to the first suitor under the duress of his objectifying, disenchanting approach. That suitor would undoubtedly elicit, filter, and constellate a certain reality that he would naturally regard as authentic knowledge of the actual universe, the objective knowledge, the facts, as compared with the subjective delusions of everyone else's approach. But we might allow ourselves to doubt just how profound a truth, how genuinely reflective the universe's deeper reality this approach might be capable of providing. Such knowledge might prove to be deeply misleading. And if this disenchanted vision were elevated to the status of being the only legitimate vision of the nature of the cosmos, upheld by an entire civilization, what an incredible, incalculable loss, an impoverishment, a tragic deformation, a grief would ultimately be suffered by both the knower and the known.
Yeah, so pretty much, really good excerpt. You like that? And what we want to talk about today is that the universe is in constant communication with us. So how can we use like different tools to empower us, to decondition from what has happened to us, in society? Because, with this parable, we see that we are kind of, one of the two suitors. The majority of us, not particularly us, but the majority of the world is one of the two suitors right now, which has been great. It's led to a lot of developments. And now we want to look at how we can synthesize back to a continuity between our internal and external worlds. So we're going to look at that today. And yes, this is going to help us to expand our consciousness, allowing us to really become authentic as responsible components of this whole, so that we can realize our purpose. And further the collective evolution of the entire organism. You can switch this slide.
And I have a question for you all to just kind of let sink in throughout the talk. And the question is, how can we enter into this cosmic communication? And where we want to start today is a little bit of an open discussion, not too crazy or anything, but basically we want to ask, like, where are we today? Where do you all feel we are today in terms of basically the worldview? Like, what are some basically...
what are things that we're seeing in the world?
Yeah.
So, like, we're seeing wars, we're seeing devastation, we're seeing great technology, we're seeing... What else? Anybody? What are some
We're seeing the end of the old and the beginning of something totally different.
Yeah.
Yes. A new paradigm.
Transition. Yeah. We also see the self-empowered subject. So basically, people are very empowered today. We have cell phones that we can pull out of our pocket and speak to a billion people, or even more if we have like the right connections and marketing and things like that. But sometimes even not. A video can go viral on YouTube in seconds. We have prepared the way for synthesis in a new way, because this objective worldview has given us a lot of things. You know, it's only been in the past 100 years that we've developed more information and found more information than we have in the entire human history. So just in the past 100 years of humanity. But we are amidst a climatic moment of transformation. So we're in what scientists are calling basically a mass extinction. We see something like 20,000 species extinct every year, which is insane. That hasn't happened in, I think, 60 million years, basically since the dinosaurs. And what's interesting too is they say that these types of mass extinctions are news for the next however many million years. So however many million years from now, people are going to be talking about what happened right now and how humanity handles this situation and what goes on here.
Well, there's one other thing that we always skirt around, which is even by the measurements of, quote, objective science, the majority of scientists, if you push them far enough, will say that you have passed the tipping point. So as long as you stay in that fundamental worldview, what ultimately ends up is a conversation called, well, when we look back, because the answer is there will be no one looking back. So that, you know, I always find that kind of interesting that we want to skirt that one particular issue to say, oh, well, this will, because by the current paradigm, there is no way to change what has already occurred.
Right.
The planet will continue to warm to where it'll be pretty much uninhabitable except for very, very little tiny pieces of life. So.
Yeah, for sure. So it's, you know, we have a lot of amazing tools and creativity and innovation and freedom, but, you know, how free, as we see, while freedom's coming by things like cell phones, we also have like enslavement to these devices and different things in a lot of ways.
That's supposed to say the myth of progress. The top. Yeah, continue.
So yeah, and but yeah, so it has done a lot of great things though, because it's prepared the way for synthesis in an entirely new way. So we can't discredit, you know, everything that's went on here. There are reasons for this stuff. You can go to the next slide.
Okay, so we have the myth of the fall as well, and we're going to talk more about the history of like how this worldview developed. And so yes, we're in a state where there's two myths going on. We have the myth of progress, which is what we were just talking about with innovation and everything, and we're also at like the myth of the fall. So we are in a disenchanted world. You know, a lot of people are feeling it's disenchanted, an objectified reality. You know, we're purposeful beings living in a purposeless universe. You know, what has happened to our psyche has kind of, you know, we're confused. Because not only has the earth been displaced from being the center of the universe, but also the self has been displaced, and now the subconscious is what drives us and rules us, apparently. The myth of that. Feeling of being separate. So, again, we've taken from, you know, being a continuous whole and being a component of that whole into being, you know, now we're separate from the whole, and we're just watching the whole, which, you know, it's something that we needed to do to be able to get the progress that we had. Disconnection from nature, deafness to its communication. So, like the traditional indigenous cultures and the old worldview, everything had meaning. And, you know, now a lot of people don't really realize how to interpret and listen to the universe. We're making decisions from fear and shame, from, you know, condition of society, because, you know, the collective whole psyche has kind of gone through this shake-up with all these shifts that happen. So we're not authentic, you know, we're not really standing in our purpose. Lack of meaning. In the universe, a lot of people don't really have meaning. Like, they think that watching the Super Bowl is like, you know, that's their meaning in life, and, you know, how many cars do I have, or how many, you know, whatever. It's like really inauthentic and not, you know, anything tangible or real. And then, yeah, so we see that on a planetary aspect of wars and destruction, and so that's kind of the worldviews where we have. We have the rise, and we have all the information and technology, and then we have, you know, like what's happening to like the majority of people. A lot of people have fallen. Do you want to? So now we want to look at what led us here. Is this your turn?
Yep.
Okay.
And you can go to the next slide as well. So I'm going to do a little bit of a account of the primal worldview. So this is, you know, an integral part of getting us here. So basically, in indigenous cultures, which were present all over the world, we had meaning in everything. There were animal totems, there were symbols and spirits. There was group tribal lucid dreaming. Every night the tribe would get together and dance and talk about things throughout the day. In the morning they would wake up and talk about their dreams, and there was no separation between the internal and the external, between nature and the tribe. Everything was constantly communal. They were making offerings for everything that they took from nature, and saying thanks for the water and the food and these sorts of things. They had an intense feeling of purpose because they felt connected to the whole. Their purpose was to interact with nature, to cultivate relationships with all the plants and animals and all of these things. And they felt that the world was a conscious being. You know, if we look at, in Peru they call the earth Pachamama. In other places, South America too, and if you go all over the world, there's different names for the being that, you know, you can call Mother Earth, Gaia. There's all sorts of various names, and yeah, so that's basically that. If you want to go to the next slide.
Okay, and so like what happened? Like really, what happened though? Like, so like 500 years ago, roughly, with the Copernican revolution, like I was saying earlier, the whole world got shaken up because all of a sudden the Earth is not the center of the universe, and that was pretty like shocking to the people at the time. They thought that everything revolved around the Earth. Now Copernicus, he studied astronomy and astrology while he was in law school, and he started doing his calculations because before that time with the astronomy, the calculations didn't quite line up with the Earth being the center. So he found that it actually made more sense that the sun would be the center, and he wrote a book about it, which he didn't publish until he was on his deathbed because it went against like the Catholic Church. So at that time there was all these external like imposing forces on humanity as far as like, you know, religious, you know, the gods of the planets as well. You know, they felt like you had to do the will of the gods, and that's part of the reason that they even studied astrology at that time. So it was very like tricky to actually release this type of information, because imagine that you have, you know, this amazing realization, and you have a lot of facts that like prove it, but everybody in the world is going to discount it. Even like Galileo, like all these, like the top people of the time like criticized it really harshly. And then when it was finally accepted and people started to come around, it was a very spiritual revelation for humanity, which science doesn't really talk about that. That it was like a really spiritual situation. They felt, you know, humanity was feeling that, oh, we finally made contact with God, you know, we finally made contact with, oh, we got the answers. And then, you know, what kind of happened out of that is they're like, okay, well, we need to like observe more, because we're not the center anymore, and we need to like really kind of figure this out more. And out of that, you know, we got the scientific revolution, gravity, and over time it has been more and more subject object. But throughout history, when we have like these loops of great innovation, and there's also a resurgence of indigenous cultures and like countercultures. They go like hand in hand. So like as we're having these like great scientific realizations, there's actually like a resurgence, just like we're seeing nowadays. So there's this high, scientific level and like technology and everything, and there's also like a big community like us, that's happening all over the world, and they've seen this rise getting more and more as time has gone on. And it's like a spiral, because you have the cycles, and it's a circle, and over time it's a linear. So when you combine them, it actually makes upward spiral. So yeah, then by objectifying the universe, they place the only meaning. So instead of everything being meaningful, they place the only meaning that we can have is inside of our consciousness, which is only like partly true, So that's kind of like the backlash of what happened with the heliocentric model coming out. So as you can see, now we're just a little self, apparently. Whereas before this, the self would have had permeated lines, and the whole thing would have been conscious. That was the older primal worldview. Yeah, can you go to the next one? Is this mine?
Yeah, this is the
Okay.
continuation.
Okay, yeah. So with the scientific revolution, we started seeing too, because before that time we anthropomorphized, a lot of different things, and that was one way that we provided deeper meaning by giving these kind of like metaphors or human characteristics to things that weren't human. So at that time, though, they started being like, oh, that's not real. You shouldn't do that. And yeah. So that gave us the disenchanted universe, and now we have a perceived freedom because we don't have to rely on the external to dictate like our existence. Now we can go out and we're gonna be empowered and do all these things, and it's not all made from the gods, and that we're not in this really tight limitation. And like I said before, we're purposeful beings living in an unconscious, purposeless universe. That's really hard to understand for us. Like, it's very confusing. And then Freud created like the depth psychology, and that's when he displaced the self as being the center of the internal universe. So he created the subconscious as being he didn't create subconscious, but he created the theory that the subconscious was now the driver of our internal universe. So we're like, what the heck is going on? Like, we're not the center on the earth, and the internal is not the center. What are we doing? So we're searching. It's been a lot of searching since then. Can you go to the next one?
So yeah, so what can we look at that kind of like ties all this stuff together? Like, what makes archetypal languages work, and what really kind of allows us to be in this active communication as a living organism, as part of the whole. And what we're going to take a look at is humans as a microcosm. And basically what a microcosm means is, I don't know if you guys are also maybe familiar with the concept of a fractal, but essentially the concept of a fractal is that when you have a whole, just like also in a hologram, each of the successive parts, if you separate them, you can find the same patterns in blueprint in the parts as you can in a whole. And so the idea with humans as a microcosm is that the human body is a map of the entire universe that we're a part of, and that within the human body in itself there are successive maps that we can find further and further down as we go to scale. You can go to the next slide. So what these are is, on the right we have what's called an iridology chart, and on the left this is an auricular therapy chart. And these both come from holistic systems of medicine. Actually, Rita here is a iridology practitioner, and she's really good at it. The interesting thing about iridology is, so what we have here is, this is a map of the entire human body that fractally correlates to our eye. So this, all the different organs and glands and tissues and the entire thing maps out over the eye. And this system has been found to have generally around 80% accuracy with diagnosis, which is pretty insane if you think about it, because you know the modern medical diagnosis system can't even come close to this. But this is a holistic system, so this isn't necessarily quite accepted by the modern worldview, because you know it causes us to bring things into question, like we're talking about today. And on the left we have an auricular therapy chart, and now these things get much more complex, the auricular therapy, but I used this one specifically today because what this shows is kind of like the fetal-like nature we have here. That was actually how they first intuited this this system, which was in Chinese medicine. They figured out that all of the acupuncture points in the entire human body, which are something like 80,000 or something, map out over the human ear. And so you can do all of the acupuncture that you can on the rest of the human body just on the ear. But basically what they did is they intuited seeing the fetus inside the ear here, so with the head down here and then kind of swooping around like this. And that's how they decided to look into this, and they've been developing it over the past maybe couple hundred years or so. Now, what's interesting about this is, then if we go to the next slide, here we have a medical astrology chart. So this, as you can see, again, we have, we're wrapping the human body around the astrology, the natal chart here, which has all of the 12 signs as we go throughout the year. And when we get into each sign, we have different cell salts, or basically the cell salts are crystals that can be distilled from plant matters or extracted from nature. And they each correspond to these different time periods of the year in the different tissues and areas of the human body. And depending in medical astrology, depending on what planetary bodies are active at different points when a person is born, this will affect the different organs and glandular tissues in the body and make them stronger or weaker, bring different energies into these areas. And so basically what this is showing here, if we can start to put all of this information together, is that this is all a giant map that we're inside of. The human body shows us that it all comes down to a fractal microcosmic level here. If we go to the next slide. So this, what we have here on the left, is the daily course of the 12 main meridians. And then on the right, we have the 12 major cranial nerve centers. And so this starts to tie in the last slide with the medical astrology, right? So this is showing that throughout the entire course of the day, we have different meridians or major nerve centers that are connected to these 12 major nerve centers in the brain. And as the day goes on, these different nerve centers get activated by the energy that goes throughout the day. Just like in the former chart, throughout the year, we again have this cycle where these different energies are activated depending on these different energetic cycles that are going on. And so what we're showing here is that just as in the human body you have these different organs and glandular systems that have these nerve centers, so if this is correlating to the time of day, which this is used in most holistic systems of medicine, especially Chinese medical holistic medicine, and also in the Hindu forms of holistic medicine too. And so what this is starting to show is that basically the universe as a whole has like an organ and a glandular system, that these different constellations that we have in the different planetary bodies are starting to have an effect on these energies, not only throughout the day, but also throughout the year in the entire human body. And you can go to the next slide. So what we're proposing here is, could we be inside of a womb? And one thing I didn't touch on with that last slide as well, if we go deeper into some of these studies as well, we're also now finding out that you can map the human DNA, the 64 codons of the DNA, out over the archetypes of what's known as the I Ching or the I Ching. And so that's the pattern that we actually see here, going behind the question, can we be in the cosmic womb? And these are different archetypes that ancient Chinese found out and intuited and figured out, basically provide a map of the energy of any situation that's going on in the world. And now that they're figuring out there's 64 of these major archetypes and there's 64 codons within our DNA. So all of this stuff is kind of working in unison as a greater holistic system. And what I want to talk about just a little bit in terms of this, could we be inside of a womb? The birth of the universe, which science has accepted with the Big Bang, is actually still happening at this very moment, if we think about it, because scientists figured out that in order to make one molecule of carbon, it takes the explosion of an entire star. Okay, so think about that for a second. One molecule of carbon takes an entire star to explode. Just think about all of the atoms and molecules of, the molecules of carbon, atoms of carbon, that are made up of our body and everything we see around us. They've also figured out that the atoms of carbon in our body were engineered in the Big Bang and the explosions that taken place there. So we're actually expressing right now through us the birth of the universe through our voice and what we're doing right now. And we're composed of exploding stars. So this is just something to sink into this information. And yeah, we want to go to the next slide. So archetypal language, now we're going to get into a little bit about that. And we have the axiom, as above, so below. So this is like a core axiom of Western occultism, of pretty much all esoteric systems throughout the world, esoteric Buddhism and all of the different esoteric systems of thought. And what esotericism is basically founded on this principle that exoteric principles are kind of like your mainstream religions that look at everything as happening external to us. But esotericism is founded on the fact that all of this stuff is a mirror. So if there's something going on in the cosmos, in the solar system, and in the universe, that we are experiencing that internally, excuse me, through our psyche. So that when the sun goes throughout its course in the day, when the moon goes throughout its course, that we feel this and we experience it internally. But then also on a planetary level, that this stuff also maps out over the universe, that the different areas of land, the countries, all of these things have correlations to what's going on in the universe. And then the planets, if we again go up from a fractal, map out over the different constellations, and all of these energies are relative to each other. And so what archetypes are is exactly what we were just bringing up with the fact that, are we in a cosmic womb? So if we think about a womb, for example, right, there are certain archetypes that are present within this, and we can go to the next slide. So what happens in a womb? Basically, in a womb, the mother, because we can think about wombs because we are familiar with those, certain ones of us have those as humans. The mother feeds the child through her own body. She takes in energy and she translates it and transforms it and feeds the building of the child's body. She also feeds it experiences. We know that children now experience different emotional states and different things like that the mother has. So this is kind of idea of an archetype. When we take an idea and then we start to break down these different aspects of the archetype. We're all familiar with like the hero's journey. This is present in most all movies that we see today, where basically the main character kind of goes through this process of growing and transformation. They go through some sort of struggle. They usually go through some sort of fall. Campbell actually theorized that basically this is the main archetype for our planet right now. This is why we have this going on in all of these movies and different things. Sorry, thank you. And what archetypes really are and what they have meant to be in the past is things that can transform us and transmute us from within. Jung was the one that really started to bring the idea of archetypes to the collective conscious when he started researching the collective unconscious and found that all of these symbols were present and found throughout all of humanity. If we look into the different religions, if we look into the indigenous, as we were talking about before, we found all of these themes present throughout all of these things. And what Jung started to find is that these archetypes actually transform us. If we meditate on them, if we ponder them, if we incorporate them into our worldview, then they begin to morph us from within. And these are multi-dimensional languages. Basically, archetypes, what they really are is the blueprints for what we experience here. So if we think about the blueprints for a house, right? The blueprints for the house are not necessarily the house itself, right? But they are what the house is built upon. So if we think about archetypes as like a living language that provides the foundation for everything we see here, because we have an archetype and then we build these energies on top of it in a way that they start to form our reality. So again, going back to the hero's journey, if we know that collectively in the unconscious that this hero's journey is present throughout all of these films and things, we can then intuit that this is probably taking place on a personal daily level for most of us, and probably on a larger macro sense throughout societies in the world. So is the world going through this kind of hero's journey right now, where right now we're starting to go, and now we're coming into the rise again. And yeah, we can go to the next slide. And so what do archetypes do? Archetypes, they heighten our level of communication. They bring imaginative intelligence to us. They increase our ability to recognize and interpret intelligible patterns. And they're more expressive and exact living expressions. So these archetypes they're more all-encompassing, and they allow us to intuit and express massive amounts of information in these very kind of visual ways. And they are co-creatively and affected by human participation. So all of these archetypes that are present throughout history also metamorphosize. They aren't like hard and fast things that can't change, because as we as humans participate with these archetypes, they also change and metamorphosize because they're like living languages.
Their potentials also get expressed when we become conscious of them. It like morphs it into a new thing. So.
You can go to the next slide.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
So for the archetypes, you're saying that Jung was saying that the archetypes are stored in the collective subconscious. That means that everyone would have access to all those archetypes at the moment of their birth, preceding any sort of enculturation or training or whatever.
Exactly.
And that even despite their interaction with those archetypes, they would be able to merge based on the actions and choices of other people that are contributing to the subconscious, of which the yet-to-be-trained person is from. Also,
Yeah. So that's an excellent point, because you reminded me of something that I really wanted to bring up. So the way that these archetypes are viewed now is that in what science calls our junk DNA. Basically, we have this vast storage of what's called junk DNA, and the idea is that this DNA. Thank you, Helix. This DNA contains the entire history of everything. And going back again to looking at the atoms of carbon and all of the lineages of the human race, all of this stuff is contained within our DNA. It's a matter of basically coming up with something, a bridge that can allow our conscious mind, which is kind of more like our active DNA, to bridge to this junk DNA, and that's
to create an environment as well that will allow it to activate. Because you can't like activate, you just have to, it happens spontaneously. So you have to actually just create the environment. And this is part of like, if you can read the communication from the universe and using the archetypes, you actually create the environment that allows all of the junk DNA, which are, expressed in the gene keys and the I Ching, and
which we'll get into that in a little bit.
they're already in you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
How could it not be? So yeah, just a little bit more about like archetypes. So we had like the Platonic and Pythagorean tradition. They believe that to align with like the archetypal order of the cosmos was to realize one's essential being, and to know the cosmos was to know oneself. And they used archetypes as like the metaphysical structures of reality. And then with Jung, like you were saying, and like we said earlier, he understood that these were like archaic patterns that existed in the unconscious, and then when we participated with them and brought them into the conscious, that they actually expressed their potentiality, and it like morphed, and we had an experience together. I think there was something else I wanted to say about that.
That's very cool.
So your participation in your archetype, so to speak, would be quite separate from your understanding of that archetype.
Well, ideally, you would want to come to an understanding. It's not like, oh, I'm playing the magician right now, or like that's like I was saying in the beginning when we started thinking about the archetypal languages. We weren't like, oh, this is an archetype. I'm not going, oh, that's an archetype, but like being able to create these, interpretive, almost like metaphors of like what's going on in the world, and that it like teaches you, and you kind of like, comprehend with it. It's like, oh, we're in a womb. Okay, like what are we birthing? And like when you think about a womb, you don't specifically picture like a woman with a baby, do you? It's already like an inherent, like you just know what it is. So I feel like that's kind of how we, does that kind of answer it?
So basically you would be a part, or you would be acting out your archetype regardless if you understood it. But the
Would
more
you say it a little
understand-
louder, please?
Sure. So what I'm asking / trying to understand is, one would be living their archetype, even if they don't understand it, even if they don't know what an archetype is, they would still be living out this type of pattern.
A type of archetype.
If I could, for a moment, my understanding of archetype is that it's the precondition for meaning in consciousness. And as such, it doesn't have a specific shape. It has specific manifestations. I feel that consciousness is bigger than the body. It doesn't originate the brain. The brain, and in fact the DNA, are like tuning systems for the signal of the consciousness of everything. And so I don't think the archetypes are necessarily specific to our nature, but specific to the nature of consciousness, universal consciousness, the consciousness that we all can all tune into and align ourselves to. And the archetypes are one way of doing that.
Absolutely. Definitely. Yeah, and I feel like there's so many different, when we look at any specific situation, there's many different overarching archetypes within a situation. within a system, within your system, within your psyche. Like there's all of these different types of archetypes that come to expression. And what we're saying is if you are aware of them, you bring them into your consciousness, you participate, you bring a much deeper meaning and understanding into it.
So yeah, now I want to talk a little bit about indigenous archetypal languages, because we want to show that these have been something that's been present for as long as we basically have recorded history on this planet. The Aztec and Mayan cultures had their archetypal languages, which we can see these types of things pictured on the left here. A lot of you guys have probably heard of like the Mayan and Aztec calendars. These were depictions of archetypes that played a part throughout the daily and yearly and cosmic cycles. They would repeat and be energies that would be at play and transform us. In like the Mayan and Aztec cultures, these things were an integral part of daily life. People were born with these different archetypes present within them, and then on a daily basis they would check into what archetypes were going to be at play so that they could more actively participate with these energies. Because if you look at them as cyclical things as well, if we know that certain archetypes are present, it means that that energy is like it's like the theme for the day. So if this energy is going to be present as like a theme, we are going to want to have to know that and have like an active participation with it, because it can make us what we're doing stronger or weaker or something like that. If we know that the archetype of, let's say, high noon is that there's a lot of heat going on, that it's going to be blistering sun and things like that, we might not want to do certain sorts of activities. There are certain plants that we might not want to plant in areas where this archetype of high sun energy is present, because it might damage the plant, especially if it's a seedling or something like this. All of these different people in these different civilizations had archetypal languages. The Toltecs were a big one. The Kemetans, which are basically like pre-Egypt, which is from Africa, and the Yoruba have their archetypal languages. The Bon, which are pre-Tibetan Buddhism. Native Americans had animal totems. And then we have what's known as the green language. And basically what the idea of the green language is this comes from like the occult mystery schools. And so this idea is that as we start to tune into the collective unconscious, as we start to learn these archetypal languages and really absorb them into our body, the green language or the bird language is basically what happens when a certain sort of level kind of unlocks within us. And then we don't always need to refer to everything as a specific archetype per se. This is where we become in a living communication with our environment, as the indigenous did. So this would be like where basically the ideas of synchronicities have to do with the bird language or the green language too, where maybe like a bird would swoop through here right now at this very moment, and that would be looked at as an agreement to something I said, some sort of loud noise that's present in the environment. We're like, oh, can you see that nature is agreeing with me right now? This is the idea of the green language or the bird language. And this is kind of more akin to how the indigenous looked at these things, as to where we were just open and receptive to our environment and to listening in this deep way. And what's been recorded in these different maps and these different hieroglyphs and all of these different things, it was kind of a way to transmit communication about them with people, because they were recording it over time, because they saw that there are these larger themes present within these languages. So they wanted to record them so that they could more quickly transmit the information. They could more easily transmit them. Or, in the case of the Mayans, in many of these other civilizations, they were so in tune with these energies that they actually looked thousands of years in advance and saw that there would be this time when humanity would lose contact with this commune with nature. And so we could even intuit that a lot of the reasons for them writing these things down like they have is so that now we can then start to relearn and reincorporate these things. And a lot of these things have been predicted throughout these different cultures. We'll go to the next slide. And again, we have, so kind of another level up from the indigenous, or a little bit more present. The general rule of thumb, or the general, the general story is that there was a turtle shell that was found with these different symbols on the back, and then their meanings and the revelations about what they meant came to a specific figure, and he turned it into this whole system. And this system has been prominent throughout history in Asia, specifically in China. All of the different dynasties that have risen and fallen, the leaders of these dynasties have consulted oracles or masters of this archetypal language to make their different decisions. For the entire country, they consult these oracles because they believe, just like within astrology and other cultures, that these are the energies that dictate what goes on in the planet. Now, the I Ching does correspond to Chinese astrology as well. So the way that they did it is, as we can see here, this is a gene key map, but just to illustrate how this would work. So you guys saw the astrology chart before, it goes in this circle, and we have the different days of the year. So these different I Ching would map out over these different areas of the year and play a part as the overarching energy. Now, in the gene keys, this is a more modern development, actually recently, with even in the past 10 years or so, I believe. But basically, this is kind of like a segue, because some different people who study the I Ching figured out that they map out over the 64 codons of DNA in our body. And so the developer of the gene keys, Richard Rudd, went into these archetypes in kind of like a mystery school way, intuiting them, incorporating them, and channeling them, and basically has come up with a system of transformation, of active transformation, like a mystery school, of working these archetypes into our life in a way that we can become more evolved. And the idea with the gene keys is that there are 3 core aspects of each archetype. There's what's known as a shadow, a gift, and a city. And what the shadow is basically, these are these unconscious, kind of subconscious, egoic ways of acting with these archetypes. Most of them are based on fears. So, as a general rule of thumb in our lives, when we act out of fear, these usually creates kind of negative, chaotic situations in our life.
Yeah, it either expresses as like a repressed action or a reactive action. So that's how it expresses as the lowest frequency.
And they call these shadows basically because this, again, has to do with like our junk DNA and this kind of hidden information in the subconscious, where I'm sure you guys have had these experiences before where you get kind of like a trigger. Something in the environment causes you to act in a way, and then all of a sudden the moment is over and you're kind of thinking about it and you're like, man, why did I act in that way? Like, I didn't really want to do that, but like something just kind of took over me. And so this is the idea of the shadow. And then the gift, the idea of the gift is that all of these shadows, all of these fears that are present, because nature has given us these fears, right? Like, this same type of fear is what causes a mother to protect her young, right? So if some sort of crazy energy is coming in here, our senses heighten, the endocrine gland is triggered, and it causes us to go into a protection mode. This is very advantageous, right? But not necessarily on a level of maybe like a human interaction in a conversation. If that same fear is triggered, and then all of a sudden we're freaking out, that's not the best situation for that. But so the gift idea is that all of these energies, if we can work with them and cultivate them, they can be gifts. Because think about something like distraction, right? Like, distraction can be a distraction, right? It can be a negative thing. You can have a little kid who's next to you, he's waving his arms, and you're sitting there, you're trying to get some work done, right? But now let's think of the gift of distraction. Well, we're looking at it right now. You guys are all distracted by me because I have something great to share with you all, or at least, you've deemed that what I have to share is great in this situation. And then the Siddhic frequency is basically, this is the ultimate divine manifestation. So the Siddhic manifestation of distraction would be intoxication. This is where we've transcended this whole game in duality consciousness of shadow and gift and good and bad, to where we're intoxicated by every situation. No matter what comes up, we're just enthralled by it because we know that the universe is communicating with us. So we should probably pay attention to that little kid that's next to us. Maybe that little kid needs our love and our attention somehow in a certain way. This is an idea of intoxication. And so we can go to the next slide.
Astrology. Astrology is a super ancient study as well. It's the study of the cycles and the patterns and the planetary movements and their correlation to human experience. It dates back, one of the earliest natal charts is 400 BCE, at least that early. It has a really diverse background. It had worldwide influence as well. The Greeks used it and they cultivated it with their archetypes of like the gods. So they used the planets as like these are specific gods. So like Venus would be like Aphrodite. So that energy that it transmits to us would be like that of Aphrodite. So it would be like beauty and love and relationships. And that's how they viewed astrology to kind of explain how they would need to fulfill the will of the gods. And Pythagoreans, also it had roots in Mesopotamia, Babylon, ancient Egypt, so pretty much everywhere. India, they have Vedic astrology, but with Vedic astrology they believe that it's more like your fate. It's very like fixed, which the ancient views of astrology was kind of like you couldn't escape your natal chart. It was like they believed that was it, and then it actually led into psychology. There was a lot of psychology studies and things that correlated, and I mean, there's so many studies that have been done as well that kind of, they don't prove that the planets cause anything. That's not what they're saying, but it's a definitive, like, almost like the archetypal energies that it's saying are in that time period are really accurate. And if we want to talk about Jung again, he found that his patients actually, because he was studying archetypes and he would have to go through all this process to do all these questions and things, and then when he got into astrology, he found that the natal chart actually was like a really worked out archetypal synthesis of the person without having to do like all of those questions and many years of like connecting with the patient. So that was really interesting, and he actually started making a lot of his life decisions, daily decisions, from synchronicity. So he started studying astrology, went into more communication like we're talking about with the universe, and communicating with synchronicities. And another interesting thing that he found was that his patients, whenever they had a synchronistic event, and he studied them, because synchronicity is it's something internal and it's showing me externally, it's showing that there's a connection. It like really healed his patients. So it's pretty awesome. You can go to the next one. Yeah, so with astrology as well, like I was saying with the I Ching, it's elements and human experience. Astrology is planetary movements and experience. So again, the planets don't cause events, but they're indicators of like what's going on. The system as a whole, it's like an interrelated wholeness where man belongs to a systemic totality having harmony, resonance, and tuning as primal characteristics. You can go to the next one. And now we're going to talk about human design.
Cool. So human design, first of all, I want to point out, how we've shown here like the evolution of archetypal languages. Now we've shown it started with the indigenous and astrology, and it's kind of morphed. We talked about gene keys a little bit, and we also talked about like the mystery schools and how they incorporated different things as well. The alchemy, which is working with the human body, was incorporated with the astrology as kind of a more holistic system. So human design is an example of a further evolution of archetypal language. It combines, this is a human design chart here we have in the background. So we see on the outside edge here we have I Ching symbols, and these are all present throughout their correlations throughout the map of astrology, which if we go down here, these are the different astrology symbols for the different constellations that are present. And then we can see these lines of energy, which these are called gates. So the idea is basically that these energies in a celestial manner come through, and they're filtered by these archetypes and correlated to two different times, but mainly let's start with the idea of our birth time. So as we're born, there's kind of this blueprint kind of map or snapshot that's taking place. And then if we go into this triangle section down here, this is the human body in the energy centers, which these different lines, which are called channels, are connecting to energy centers, which are the colored shapes. And these are related to the nadis in ancient Hindu holistic therapies, and they're also related to the Kabbalah, which is the ancient Jewish mysticism system. And so what this system has done is this system has kind of combined all of these into one more holistic system, which in a lot of ways the ancient in the mystery schools, they were kind of already doing this, but this is kind of in a more exact, definitive way, right? And so how did this system come about? Well, I believe it was 1987. We had a supernova that took place pretty close to us, relatively speaking. It was visible with the naked eye. And this, around the time of this supernova, within a few days actually, there was an individual known as Ra-Uru. And this individual basically had an episode that happened where, as the energy of the supernova bombarded the Earth, he started having a massive series of revelations where what he called the voice, which we could look at that as some sort of external entity, or we could say that maybe it's the collective subconscious. But basically that this voice started revealing to him how this system worked and how these archetypes correlated with one another. And yeah.
Just so that we know, like, about the supernovas, basically it's like a star, and over many millions of years it starts like combining with different and gassing off different elements over like millions of years. So, and every time it does that and it combines with the elements and then shoots them off and it's going, it's releasing all of those elements into, the universe. And one thing that I wanted to get into about that is the neutrinos. Neutrinos are like the smallest known particle to man, and they exist throughout the entire universe. They're very hard to actually monitor or try to collect data from because they're super tiny and elusive, but they have figured out that they do exist. And with the neutrinos, so the supernova went off and it was in our galaxy, and
This is actually a picture of that supernova.
and it was very close to us. And supernovas travel just under the speed of light, and they don't have a nuclear strong force, so they can oscillate between different states and they can interact with matter and different materials. So I think that they actually like carry information as they go, as they're oscillating and they're communicating. So they can go through our bodies and go through different things and kind of carry information. So it's kind of interesting how that situation happened, and then we have human design like right after. It almost seems like something scanned our universe or something, and it was like, oh, here you guys go, here's your blueprint for a lot of different things.
It's also the beginning of the precession of the equinox and the harmonic convergence.
You're right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's a pretty big time.
Yeah, what's something interesting too about the system of human design is part of the revelation of the human design system was that previous to this system, most of these esoteric systems of transformation were quote-unquote Saturnalian. And this is basically the idea that we had 7 chakras and 7 days of the week, and everything is correlated to the number 7 in a lot of these systems. And what the revelation of human design is that around the exact time of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, synchronistically, we also were able to finally see the planet Uranus
It was within like a few years.
yeah, within a few years. It was around the exact same time. And what's interesting about this is Uranus has to do with independence, right? So all of a sudden Uranus comes into view, and now we're signing the Declaration of Independence. And what the revelation of human design is at this time, humans went from having 7 major energy centers to having 9 major energy centers, which has to do with the planet Uranus as the main governance of this energy center.
I just want to add something about Uranus too. So before we discovered Uranus, we had like Saturn as like, oh, that's the planet that, you know, it's the one that we can see the furthest. Yeah, and its cycle is 30 years approximately, right? And that up until that point, for a while, 30 years was around the life expectancy. And then we discovered Uranus, which is about 84 years. It takes a cycle. And yeah, so now we're like living longer. The thing that didn't change though, which probably should have changed, was the amount of time like the child stays with the mother. So if we adjusted correctly to Uranus now, we should be staying like with our family or our tribe, or being raised. It would take like 40 years actually to reach maturity.
Which is really interesting, because if we think about it now with like our, me and Danielle, maybe a little bit younger generation, society, the changes that are going on into society level is just almost kind of like forcing kids to be around their parents or more dependent on their parents for longer, because they're like leaving college and there's no jobs, right? But the generation before, they like had these situations, so it's like creating kind of more of a dependency. So it's just kind of naturally almost evolving into this way.
And one more interesting thing too. So when this system was discovered, it was 87, and the guy who transmitted it or had like a realization, part of his realization was at 2027, which is 40 years, there's going to be a big event. A mutation. Because right now we're in a 9-centered body, right? And we're kind of like in a transition period. We can't really fully access, like we're learning how to access like this new mutation that has happened to us. And apparently at 2027, he feels that there's going to be an event. And it's just interesting. So it's like, are we in a womb? Like, are we in 40 years going